our bodies run not only on like daily cycles like men do, but we also have this overarching monthly long cycle that impacts our energy, our stress resilience, our nervous system, like just such a huge impact on who we are as people. And what a disservice that is to not know about that.
Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Perda. As a marriage coach who's married with 3 kids, I know how easy it is for marriage to take a back seat. But unlike your parents' marriage, your marriage can feel good while raising kids and doesn't have to feel hard. It can look like having each other's backs, even flirting and looking forward to spending time with each other. And I'm here to help you. So join me here each week as we dive into what it takes for your marriage to become something you enjoy again, from how to handle conflict better and bringing that spark back into your relationship. If you're ready for your marriage to feel good again, this podcast is for you. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. I am super stoked for this week's guest because we're going to be talking about something that most women experience on a regular basis. Maybe something you've grown to hate, to wish away, and that's your period. If you're on your period, you have no idea the power you can harness by actually getting to know it better. And Briana here is here to teach us all about it so that we can actually start to embrace it and use it to our benefit. And I'm so excited to have you here, Briana. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to jump into this.
Yeah. So just to share a little bit about Briana, she is a certified menstrual cycle coach and host of the Hormone Rants podcast. She's also a wife and mom of 3. Her experience with premenstrual dysphoric disorder, otherwise known as PMDD, inspired her mission to bring the conversation around periods out of the menstrual health niche into our everyday lives. With over 5 years of personal and professional experience cycle syncing, Briana specializes in helping driven, ambitious women harness their menstrual cycle so they can optimize their energy and productivity and achieve their personal and professional goals without sacrificing their health, relationships, or themselves in the process. I love all of this. I think anything that can help us be more us is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially like as moms, because that transition, it's so easy to lose ourselves in it. And instead of seeing it as like a time to redefine and, evolve into this new version of ourselves, it often feels like, okay, where did I go? How did I get here? And who am I?
Totally. That loss of identity
Mhm.
is a big thing. And I think all moms can relate to that. I know I certainly have. And I love that this is just another way that we can build on our self-awareness and self-empowerment. So before we get into it, can you share with us where you live, how old your kids are, and what inspired you to become a menstrual cycle coach?
Absolutely. So we are currently in Phoenix, Arizona. We moved here from Chicago in the middle of 2020, taking advantage of that everyone's remote indefinitely like moment to make a big move, which was so needed because we have young kids and we were like in a 2-bedroom apartment in the city of Chicago. And we're like, this is not how we're doing the pandemic with everything shut down. So we have a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So little, close in age. So it's just like a wild, wild ride. And honestly, like my kids are a big reason that I actually started to look into answers for my cycle. I was diagnosed with PMDD in 2016 and realized like, oh, this has been my experience from day one of my period. And so that whole sort of circle of getting a diagnosis of like some relief that there's a name for this isn't normal. You're not in somehow, failing where other women are managing their experience. But then quickly followed up by like, and we don't really have any solutions besides like the pill or menopause as the answers to that. And so for a little while, I was kind of just like, okay, well, at least I know what it is. I can kind of at least know when I'm going to hit the wall and kind of how to, you know, manage that. But it was really a lot of like isolation when I was having bad days and essentially bad weeks. But then when I had my kids, it became a real thing of like, oh, like I can't just like get everything done in 2 weeks and coast the rest of the month. They're here all the time, very needy. and very physically needy, which was especially hard for me of just that physical demand on my body. And that was really like, okay, this is no longer sustainable to do anything, to be the mom I want to be, the wife I want to be, to show up for my goals the way I want to. And that was really the push that I needed to be like, okay, there's got to be some answers. And so I went down the rabbit hole of learning about the menstrual cycle and learning about the female body. And what really blew my mind in that process was that this isn't just about people with hormone disorders or hormone imbalances or how to fix your body. It's really that our bodies run not only on like daily cycles like men do, but we also have this overarching monthly long cycle that impacts our energy, our stress resilience, our nervous system, like just such a huge impact on who we are as people. And that, what a disservice that is to not know about that when we're actually making decisions about our life, not just our menstrual health from that health perspective and physical perspective, but also like, how am I choosing what my goals are? How am I setting my expectations of how I'm going after them? How am I thinking about integrating family and work and relationships and all of those pieces? And so just that lack of like awareness about our bodies, how much that impacts more, right, than just our health. So those are really kind of the pieces that inspired me to say, okay, like I found something that has made such an impact in my life, and more women, and not just women, but more of our daughters need to have this information sooner. And that's always been a big part of it too with my daughter, of like, no, I need better answers for her than I had and was given.
Oh, I love this so much because just growing up, it's like you don't talk about it, you try and
Mhm.
hide it. It's something embarrassing, right?
And everything's
And
normal. Like no matter
that,
what you say is
right,
your experience, like everything's like, oh, that's just part of it. Like that's just what you have to
exactly.
accept. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, like, when you think about it, it's like, "Oh, it just means you're not pregnant," and that was the extent of that, but it's so much more
Hmm.
to that because you alluded to, how different we are to men, like, men run on a daily cycle, whereas we're, like, the
We
monthly.
have both. So
Yeah,
it gets to
and
be
we
fun
compare
and
ourselves.
complex and yeah,
Yeah,
can be beautiful. But yeah, when we're comparing it to just like, oh, look, they do the same thing every day, they get the same results every day. The real kicker that gets us, and we're like, why doesn't it look like that for me? And society
right,
has also emphasized that comparison and said, like, because it doesn't look like this, that means in some way, like, you're not as capable or you're missing something or like you're the problem, as
right.
opposed to like not actually understanding what you bring to the table and being able to celebrate that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny that the only time women who aren't aware of cycle syncing of their period, like, they're only aware of
Hmm.
it when they're trying to have kids. They're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, where in the cycle am I?" Otherwise, we don't know that there are different phases
Hmm.
of our cycle. So, first of all, can you share with us what those phases are and a little overview of why it's so important that we know what phase we're in and how we can best utilize that information to make our lives easier?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you bring this up because it's so true. Like, we're taught that periods are just about having babies or not having babies. And there's so much more. There's actually 4 phases to the cycle, with the menstrual cycle only being one. And while it's easiest to talk about it as like the start, because that's like the most physical marker we have, and that's still how we measure it, right? Day one of your period is day one of the cycle. But really, if you think about the process that's happening, like the period is the culmination. And what's really happening is ovulation is the key event. And that's that mid cycle phase. And that's really what's responsible for production of our hormones and our experience of our cycle. And then that culminates in a period or pregnancy is that process reproductively. But what it looks like from like an emotional and energetic perspective is what's even more impactful, I think, is that once our period ends or near the last few days of our period, we actually move into another phase called the follicular phase. And this is a transition where our estrogen starts to rise. With that estrogen, we get a boost of serotonin. And I like to think of this window as almost like the hormonal amnesia effect, because we get those like rose colored glasses. Everything that happened on our period almost becomes this like foggy, like black hole that everything just falls into. And we're like, no, actually, everything's fine. Our life is great. I feel capable of everything.
Relatable.
I can handle all the sports events and the food prep. And like, I don't need anyone's help to do it. Right. And then And then as we get towards ovulation, we probably notice this most in like the uptick in energy, uptick in libido, like you kind of just feel yourself the most. And then after that, after ovulation happens, we go into another phase called the luteal phase. And that's another sort of transition between ovulation and our period. And with that transition, our estrogen drops, progesterone kicks in, and that transition is really like bringing us a little bit more internal to our own needs. But we also tend to have a more sensitive response to stress. And that trigger is a little bit more sensitive. And so what seemed like, oh yeah, I got this. Like I finally got my life under control, whatever habits I implemented right after my period, like these were the ones. Those other things I tried last month, like that wasn't the right system, but I finally got the system. And then these weeks in luteal is when we kind of feel like, okay, it's all crashing and burning again. I feel completely burnt out. No one's helping me. Why doesn't anyone clean up after themselves? And what I like to think about is like these different phases are essentially like, where's the microscope pointed in your life? And so it's not that one version is more or less of who you are. It's just where your focus is shifting. And that has a huge impact from your hormones. And then, of course, how it interacts with your other physical symptoms, like your energy levels, because you burn more calories when you're right before your period. So you need to eat more. So those cravings are not bad. There's signs from your body that you're hungry, right? And so it's how do we actually make then intentional choices to support our bodies so that our energy levels feel good and feel something that can actually meet the demands in our life.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot to
I
unpack. But that's too, one thing I like to say though with that is like, it is a lot to unpack, but that's where the embodiment piece comes in the work that I do. Because if it's just information that we're trying to apply like top down to our body, it feels like another system, another like, time blocking or another kind of hack that we're trying to force our life into, as opposed from it being something that's coming up from bottom up internally of like, this is how I feel and experience these transitions. And how do I have that work for me and like integrate that more?
Yeah, I love that since becoming more aware of my cycle, I've been able to really unapologetically live in a way that honors how my
Hmm.
body is feeling, right? I think we in the society are often pushed to be a certain way all the time, be consistent. It's like we're not meant to be consistent. We're not designed to be that way. And we look at men, they're like, what the hell? You go to sleep and you're
Hmm.
fine, right? Whereas depending on where we are in our phase, we could feel really energetic and we could feel
Yeah.
like, oh God, I just need to like go lay on the couch and rest a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit more about how as women we both have a daily cycle and a monthly cycle?
Yes. So this is so important to understand because we do have both. And I also like to emphasize that while it may sound complicated, to understand it as its complexity. And that is something, because I feel like complicated, it has such a bad connotation, like, oh, we're so complicated, we're so hard to understand. And so we kind of just don't try, or that's what we've been kind of led to believe, like, oh, it's just too complicated, like just focus on your period and that's it. But when we understand it's like it's complex because our bodies are capable of doing such complex work. Like we 3D print babies, we grow organs, we grow brains, like that's complex work. And so to appreciate like why our body is complex in these ways, I think is such an important place to start. But when it comes to the two sort of cycles that are the dominant ones in how our bodies function, the daily one is often referred to as a circadian rhythm, meaning
Mm.
that it repeats on a 24-hour cycle. And that really controls like melatonin, our blood sugar, things that are happening, daily processes in terms of sleep and eating. And how I like to think about them working together is that circadian rhythm is essentially the when. When are you getting hungry? When are you getting sleepy? Like, when do you have the most energy in your day normally? Like, are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? Are you a middle of the afternoon person? Whatever type, like, when is that core peak energy happening for you in your day? And then what the infradian rhythm or that monthly cycle is telling us is how much. So
Mm.
when you are hungry, how hungry are you? How much nutrients do you need to recuperate the work that your body's doing outside of like external things? Like, did I work out today? Was it a longer day at work, those kinds of things. It's like, how much work is your body doing and what needs to replenish it? Or like when you're tired, it's like, how tired are you? How much sleep do you need to replenish? And so that's how they sort of work together. And it makes it more intuitive in this process of like, oh, it makes sense that I'm hungry at the same times of the day. But sometimes it's like, oh, yeah, I could have that smoothie and feel good for a little while. And then other days I'm like, wait, after that smoothie, you're like, okay, and where's my donut? And where's like, the chips? And you can't seem to fill that void because your body is actually requiring a different quantity of food, nutrients, and things at that time. And it's the same with our energy. If you're a morning person, you're probably going to be a morning person across the whole month. But how much energy you have or how long that lasts is going to vary based on where you're at in your cycle.
I love that. And yeah, that does sound complicated, but also like you've been living it your whole
Mm-hmm.
life. It's just a matter of like realizing it, right?
Yeah.
It's not like some new thing that you have to study. It's just something that you start noticing and spotting patterns. So I know you mentioned PMDD earlier, and I want to make sure that those who may have it and just have no idea,
Yeah.
can you help describe the common symptoms or experiences that someone with PMDD might have so that people can be like, oh shit, that's me?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this idea of like what's normal, what's not is something that isn't addressed very often. And so it's definitely a super important question. So, yeah, when we think about even like normal symptoms, it's normal for us to ebb and flow in energy, to ebb and flow in appetite, to ebb and flow in our mood to some extent. But those, like what's normal, should not be debilitating. It should not be keeping you from being able to show up in your day-to-day life and get like day-to-day things done. That doesn't mean that you'll never feel like, okay, I have way too much on my plate for the energy that I have, or feel like you're pushing through a little bit more from day to day. And that really comes back to like, are your expectations aligned? But with PMDD, what happens is there's a clear shift after ovulation. Some people it's like immediately after, and other people it's like the week before their period is where they feel the symptoms. And what's supposed to happen is progesterone is supposed to give us sort of like a calming, like nervous system regulating effect. But with PMDD, we respond differently to that same hormone change. So it's really the shifts in hormones that trigger the different response. And ultimately, what it feels like is like there's just this shift where you feel like depressed, anxious, lethargic. You might feel like you have a lot of intrusive thoughts. Many women with PMDD have suicidal ideation as well. Like it can just feel like you go into this dark hole and it can feel really intense. You can have extreme reactions in terms of like anger and rage. And then what really demarcates it from like someone with PMS or like just PMS mixed with trauma or some other kind of thing like that, because you could still experience intense mess in that way. But then it's like as soon as your period starts, it's like a cloud lifts and you're back. Like it just very much like a, Jekyll and Hyde type feeling. And a lot of women who have it have oftentimes are diagnosed or misdiagnosed with bipolar because it's almost a similar sort of like switch that happens. But the real difference here is that it's happening really consistently connected to your hormone cycle. And so the best way to know like if that is your experience is to track your symptoms. I can send you a resource for specific trackers for PMDD, like to keep track of those things. And if you're seeing those patterns happening, 2 to 3 months in a row, and you may already know, like you may be listening to this and like, oh yeah, okay, that's been happening for months, but tracking it for a few months is super helpful if you want to bring that to your doctor and get a diagnosis and things. Like having that data to show is super helpful.
Yeah, that sounds really hard. I
Yeah.
feel like certain people are like everybody obviously experiences their cycle differently, right?
Hmm.
Some people PMS hits them real hard. Others it's just like, okay, yeah, I notice a change, but like my mood doesn't shift that much. But for those whose mood shifts a lot
Hmm.
and they are noticing how much it's impacting their availability to their family, to their
Yeah.
marriage, right? They're like biting people's heads off left and right, just very irritated, angry. What can they do to make that different, right? Because obviously we don't want to seem like this like
Mhm.
monster 1 week every month, right?
Yeah, so there's so many ways to approach it. And I always want to start with like the mindset behind it because I know when I first started, it was very much like I am doing things to fix my body. I'm doing things, and in some ways, using like health approaches like restricting certain foods or working out in certain ways and doing it in a way to punish myself. And
Mm.
I didn't necessarily realize it at the time initially, but realized that like I had this view that I'm like, I'm basically my mind, like that's who I am. And then I'm stuck in this body and it was always in competition. And so then in order to like fix my body, it was like all these even positive like lifestyle changes came at it as a way of like punishing. And that's not creating an environment of safety and security for your body to actually heal. And that's what I found, like, I was doing all of these things, I, like, cut out dairy and gluten and, like, all this stuff, I started eating cleaner, all these things, and I felt horrible, like, I didn't see any changes in my symptoms, and it was really a kind of a dark season of, like, okay, I'm doing all the things, and I'm not seeing any result. So, one of the first shifts that was really impactful in me experiencing something different was partnering with my body, that my body and I are in the same team. We both have the same goal, and actually seeing things as how can I support my body and what's my body ready for? And so that's really where it ties into kind of like nervous system regulation and safety too, because back to like the hormone process where progesterone is supposed to help provide that. And if you're not responding to it that way, then you need to do some extra work on your end to do that regulation for yourself. But
Yeah.
again, in those moments, it can feel really challenging to actually take those steps, especially if it feels like a really big step. Like I know I can't even count the amount of times people told me to like, oh, you need to go on walks, you need to get out in the sun. And I'm like, I can't get out of bed. Like
Yeah.
these things feel so far from where I'm at right now. So a big part of it is like accepting that this version of yourself and that it's needs healing, it needs compassion. And when you're able to look at it and approach it from a place of self compassion, the little things that you can do and tweak about your lifestyle have such a bigger impact because your body's actually available to receive it
Mm.
and work with it. So with that said, there are also, some tangible things to do. And I would say one of the biggest things is to look at like nutrition and making sure that you're fueling your body appropriately because one thing that really helps for mood for anyone, but especially if your symptoms are really extreme, is balancing your blood sugar.
Mhm.
And already in the luteal phase, you need more calories. And so you're more susceptible to blood sugar dips. And then if on top of that, you're struggling with mental illness where even the basics feel incredibly difficult, like there would be times I'd be like, my dinner's a bag of pretzels because that's the energy I had to like grab something. So this is where cycle syncing can really come in and support you because you know that you're going to have weeks where you have more energy and using those weeks to meal plan, to meal prep, to have freezer meals, to have things set up that you know that there's ways for you to still support your body, but it makes it like the smallest steps are necessary to do the best things for your body. And again, coming at it from that place of self compassion allows it to be like good enough. And also to have the mentality too of like eating something is better than nothing. Because there were times where that was definitely a big part of it where like I would want to go into the shame spiral of like all I'm eating are pretzels or popcorn or a bowl of cereal and knowing that's not what my body needed, but also having the compassion and grace to say like this is what my body was capable of doing in this moment. And I chose calories. I chose some kind of fuel, right? But as you go through this process, it's really that balance of like, how can I better support myself while also having compassion for what I have today, what I have to show up, with at this moment. And that capacity will grow if you
Oh,
give yourself that time to do it.
that's so good. And I can only imagine how much more important communication in your marriage
Mhm.
is with this, right? Communication in general is huge. Just like how if you have a huge project coming up at work and you know you're going to be like heads
Yep.
down into it, stressed out, you're going to have to make the burden on you easier and lean on your partnership a little bit more. And just like this, you know when it's going to happen, hopefully,
Yeah.
like give or
Yeah,
take a
when you
day or
start
two.
tracking, you'll
Yeah.
have an idea of like when it starts, and it's typically pretty consistent for you as a person, even if it
Mm-hmm.
varies between people. Hmm.
Yeah. And then like I remember I had a client like years ago actually. She had pretty bad like PMS symptoms. I told her, "Why don't you just mark it on the calendar? Let's just
Hmm.
like take the shame out of it and let your husband know, hey, it's going to happen around this time and so I'm going to need a little more grace, need a little support and like, do what you can to get all the she actually has a farm and has farm animals. Like, let's not do that. Let's not like add more stuff to our plate when you're in this phase of your
Hmm.
cycle. And can you take care of stuff earlier on? Can you, hand it off to your husband, trade responsibilities for the week? How can you make your life easier by honoring your body? And so this is what I'm kind of hearing and what you're saying is like, hey, this is coming. How can you support yourself so that you can make a more ideal experience out of this temporary phase that you're going to step into?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there is that piece. If you're dealing with really extreme symptoms, whether that's like emotional, like PMDD, or extreme pain, like endometriosis or fibroids, where that takes you out for a number of days or weeks out of the month, like that first step is like honoring your body, self compassion, like healing before you can really like tap into like, oh, now I'm going to be like so productive and leverage all of these gifts. So it's like first you need to be able to get to that place where you can see them as gifts. And I love what you're saying of bringing people into it, because if you have a partner, if you have kids that are not babies, you have people to delegate to. And the first thing I always recommend is getting these phases on your calendar, whether it's for your business, for your work, or in your family responsibilities. As soon as you can get these phases on the calendar where you have everything else, that's when you start to see patterns so much quicker. Because if it's in your head, if it's in your period app, it's so much harder to connect, like, oh, yeah, that's why today felt so hard. I'm on day 26 or I'm on, day 30. Like, that's why I had that meltdown. And that awareness can help you set yourself up for support and set other people up to support you as well. And that, again, knowing like how many days are more debilitating for you is also really helpful in terms of knowing like how to communicate that. Because again, you have weeks where your energy is higher. You have weeks, like especially around ovulation, where your ability to communicate is actually stronger. Like your verbal abilities are just more clear, more in tune with your experience. And that goes down as you get closer to your period, because you're more in that intuitive space. You're more in this connection to your subconscious. So getting it into conscious and verbal space, it takes a little bit more time and pause and reflection. So it's not like you become like incapable. It's a shift, right? Your
Yes.
connection to certain skills, you're tapping into different pieces of yourself. But when you have that ability, like that's the best time to break things down for people. Because I know I've had this experience before where it's like, okay, now I'm feeling terrible and like I need all this support and help. And I ask for it, but then there's always follow up questions like, how do I do this? Do you want it like this or that? And those follow up questions can be so overwhelming in and of themselves, and then also irritating. Like, you have a brain, can't you like figure this out on your own? But also, if you have those conversations beforehand of like, here's the breakdown of the tasks, and not to say that you need to take on all the mental work, but if you're teaching a kid how to do, a new chore, or you're asking them to do something a way that you like it done, or as you're transitioning into that delegation process, similar like you would with an employee, you're going to have some sort of protocol or some sort of, onboarding process.
Yep.
And if you can do that when you're feeling more capable, not necessarily where you need help, but you're like, okay, I know this is coming. This is what would be really helpful. Or when I say like, I need a break, this is what that means. It means
Mm.
I need 5 minutes. I need you to jump in and take over whatever's happening so I can have 5 minutes to go lay on the floor in silence, to do some breath work, to use these other tools that we have in our toolbox to support us. But then in the moment, you don't have all that pressure of not only saying that, asking for help, which can already be a hurdle, but you
Yeah.
also don't necessarily need to be in that place where you need to explain what it all means, because that's going to feel like a harder ask of yourself to do in that moment as well.
Oh,
And
for
that's when it
sure.
becomes, right, where you're biting people's heads off or like,
Yeah.
more reactionary as opposed to responsive in those moments.
Yeah. So definitely being proactive. I mean, in I think all areas of life is always better, right? But give yourself grace. You can't always plan for everything. You're going to learn along the way.
Absolutely.
But as much as you can, whatever you're noticing, maybe keep a journal if it helps you. That could really facilitate really great conversations with your partner. So you can kind of bring them into the process and help your family life feel better. Even while you're not feeling your best, you could feel still supported and nurture yourself through the process. So, yeah, this was
Yeah.
like
And
so
one thing,
rich.
can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to the relationship piece, and if you've been dealing with like something like PMDD for a while, is finding moments, especially in that like follicular ovulatory window, to be open to hearing your partner's experience or
Mm,
also helping them seek support that they might need in the process. This comes from a very like personal place. Like me and my husband have been married for 11 and a half years. And, I've been doing this work for around 5 or so years, a little bit more for myself. And it's been a journey, but we're still like unpacking the kind of trauma on both of us, like the hurt and things that happened because of living with a mental illness, and especially for so much of that time together not being aware of that pattern or what was happening. And definitely now I feel like as I've gotten better, it's created more space and room for his experience, and so he's kind of going through his own journey with it, but also understanding that like there may be, you're both experiencing it, but your experience of it is a little bit different. And that doesn't mean you have to be the one to like make him feel better, like be that support person for that all the time, but also understanding where you may need to bring in outside support to, just, yeah, facilitate that in like the relationship as well.
yeah, I love that. Making sure that there's a safe space for everyone, whether it's
Hmm.
you or someone else, is really vital because both of your experiences matter. And if that doesn't get addressed, it can breed a lot of resentment and more pain and distance for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all this. This is
Of course.
incredible. You had mentioned that you have a guide. So,
Yes.
can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So it's called the Menstrual Cycle Mapping Guide. And essentially, it's a worksheet, but I also have like a video that goes along with it if that's more helpful for you to kind of go guided that way. But just to help you understand, like, when are your phases, how to know what that experience will feel like, because there is a little bit of an art and science to it. We do have some biological markers that tell you when you're in certain phases, and others are more intuitive, kind of knowing of like, okay, I felt that shift happen. And then also how to then take that and like journal on it, questions to consider and reflect on so you can figure out, how do I experience each of these phases currently, so that you can start to raise your awareness and then also have that intentionality of like, where am I seeing the need for more support, more communication, and all of those, beautiful steps afterward.
I love it. So if you are interested in getting that, go check out the link in the show notes. What is the best way for people to connect with you, Brianna?
Yeah, so I would say the best way right now is like in a little bit of a transition, but either on Instagram, and I'm also um, shifting a little bit towards LinkedIn. So if you want to follow there as well, but both of those places. And then also like in the guide, there's some links there if you want to jump on a call with me to kind of unpack things a little bit more. Because one of the ways that I would say that I work with people, especially like I know a lot of our conversation is centered on PMDD and that experience, is my one-on-one group coach or one-on-one coaching, not group coaching, one-on-one coaching, called Embracing Cyclical. And that is really designed for that journey of like, if you've had a really hard relationship with your cycle, how to heal that relationship, how to rewrite it, and how to actually transition to designing like what's optimal for you and how to move through those spaces in a more empowered way. And so that's like a great kind of next step if that's where you're struggling and dealing with.
Amazing. Okay, so before I let you go, I
Yes.
love to ask my listeners a question, or not my list. I love to ask my guests a question so listeners can get to know you better. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I know when it comes to periods, we get cravings sometimes, right? Like I know personally, I love to go prepare for my period by visiting the local Seeds shops and getting the dark chocolate walnut squares. What is your favorite or go-to period snack or treat?
So always chocolate,
Yeah.
something chocolate, and then it changes. Sometimes I'm feeling more like in the, self-care, I'm doing my best version and I get like the dark chocolate squares and like savor it. Right now I'm like in a more like treat yourself and like this is what I've been having. These are
Oh my gosh.
from Costco.
Costco, yep.
These like
My
s'more
husband loves
bundles.
that.
Oh my gosh. They're so good. I've been like on a kick with these and I'm like trying to pace myself. But I'd say right now that's been my go-to.
Yeah. Did you see that they have like s'more clusters there too?
I did see that.
They're
Yeah. I
humongous.
wasn't brave enough to switch because I was like, these are so good.
Yeah.
And those ones are like, well, and also Costco, it's like this giant bag. And so I'm
Yes.
like, maybe we'll try that one next.
Yeah. Well, my husband loves it, has caramel in it too. I actually don't really like marshmallows outside of Rice Krispie treats, so I don't even touch that. Well, thank you so much. It was amazing having you on here. If you connected with what Brianna's saying, please go follow her, download her
Yeah,
menstrual cycle guide, and go check her out and go work with her if you are struggling with your cycle and you now know that it could be different. Okay. All right. I will catch you back here next week. Thank you so much, Brianna, for joining us here.
oh, of course. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. I would so appreciate that. And if you love what I share here, then you're going to love and want to join my free private Facebook community that's also called Marriage and Motherhood. I hope to see and connect with you in there. Otherwise, I'll catch you back here for the next episode. Bye.